Good morning and welcome to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. I'm Joe Ramage and I'm joined by Scott Wilson today. Before we get going, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to our partners as always, Michael and the team down at the Sunderland's Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians in Durham. Plenty to talk about, even though the season has finished, Scott. They never seem to disappoint in this club. But first of all, how are you doing anyway? How's things?
All good, mate. Yeah, all good. We were just talking before we started filming, weren't we? I'm looking outside and grey skies, dark, rain lashing off the windows. It feels like we should be talking about a kind of November trip to Blackburn away or something like that. That's what it feels like. Not the middle of summer, but there we go. The joys of living in the northeast.
Yeah, I'll apologise now if you can hear the rain batting off the conservatory roof. It's pretty brutal out there. I think we've obviously had our summer, haven't we? We've had our 2 days of joy over the weekend.
Exactly.
Ironically as well, I was just looking today that it's 2 years on since the playoff final, since promotion at Wycombe. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I know. It's been a whirlwind, really, hasn't it? Yeah, I mean, there's been an awful lot of ups and downs, hasn't there, in the 2 years? I mean, I'm guessing if you'd said to Sunderland fans walking out of Wembley that in the next 2 years you'd be a pretty established championship club. In one of the seasons, you'll get to the playoffs. In the other, you'll kind of be in the mix for some of the season, but ultimately fall short. I think most Sunderland fans would probably have taken that. Because, there were question marks about having been away for so long in League One. How would things pan out? How successful could you be, etc.? I mean, in some ways, they've done it the wrong way around, haven't they, Sunderland? In that the first season back, they're in the playoffs. The second season back, things have gone backwards. Had you flipped those 2 seasons, the feeling would probably be a bit different. But, I think, listen, there's been an awful lot of doom and gloom around the club in the last few months and for justifiable reasons. I think they have got a number of things right since that promotion in terms of bedding themselves back into the championship and looking at being more self-sustainable and trying to get the finances in order and et cetera, et cetera. There's an awful lot clearly that needs to happen this summer. But I think the last 2 years in general have probably contained more positives than negatives. It's just the negatives have been back-ended. So it feels like that's all that we talk about at the moment.
Within that as well, do you almost think that there's cause for or room for a little bit of perspective there as well? Because, I mean, if that day doesn't go the way that it does, these 2 years, as frustrating and as disappointing as this year has been, particularly the last 6 months, but they don't happen at all, and you could be still sort of locked in the perils of League One almost, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think that's a decent point, that it's very easy to forget just how long ago we were waiting for the fixture list and when's Fleetwood away, when's Shrewsbury away, when's Burton away. That was the reality for 4 summers in a row. I don't think it can be glossed over the fact that playoff final win was transformative in terms of where the club is at now and where it's been and all that kind of stuff. And it was obviously just a magical day, having suffered so many Wembley defeats, to actually go there and win it in the manner that Sunderland did was fantastic. I think there does need to be a bit of perspective. But by the same token, the lessons of the spell in League One show just how easily a slide can become something far more entrenched and far more damaging and far more dangerous. And so, I think there is an opportunity for perspective there, but I think there's also a real a real warning sign that the club cannot afford to get some of these key decisions that they're going to have to make this summer wrong, because, as we all know, to our kind of detriment, the argument that things can't get any worse than they are at the minute is utterly invalid, because we all know that they can.
Yeah, absolutely can. But I mean, I suppose in the meantime, we'll all rejoice in watching those clips of Ross Stewart scoring the second goal. Yeah. Before we do get going today, obviously news has just come out this morning. I don't know if you've seen it or not, about Tony Mowbray stepping down at Birmingham. There's a bit of a lengthy statement up on the club website, basically saying he doesn't think he'll be able to be recovered in time to commit to the start of the season almost. Once I fully recovered, it's important to me that I spend some quality time with my wife and my boys before I fully commit to work. Statement continues towards the end where he says, "Once I've fully recovered and spent some quality time with my family, I intend to make a return to football management at the appropriate moment." I guess just some initial thoughts on Tony Mowbray. Obviously, we send our best wishes to him, and it will be good to see him back in the dugout somewhere, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sad and worrying, isn't it? I mean, it was a bit of a shock when the news first came through that he was stepping down from Birmingham, obviously because of serious health issues. We've all had a bit of time to digest that news now and everything. I think there were suggestions certainly around the kind of Birmingham media that maybe he would be back for next season. That's obviously not happening, so that's a real shame. It's easy to kind of say it sitting here and not knowing exactly what's going on and from a distance, but Tony Mowbray needs to just needs to get better and spend some time, as he's alluded to there, with his family, because he's gone through so much in football. He's achieved so much. He's had so many ups and downs. That you are thinking in the back of your head, well, does he need to come back at all? Isn't it time now for him just to say, right, okay, that's me? But as we've seen from a succession of managers, look at Neil Warnock. They just find it so hard to give it up because it is such a massive part of their lives. And Tony Mowbray is clearly still going through a major health battle. Maybe part of him getting through that is that at the end of the tunnel, if you like, part of the light is that he can get back into football. And that's a real motivation for him to keep going and get himself better. So, who knows? Hopefully one day, at the very least, Tony Mowbray will be back watching football at the Stadium of Light and at the Riverside, where he's obviously equally as revered at Borough. Because he was a big, well, he clearly was a massive part of Borough, both as a player and a manager, but he was a big part of Sunderland. He obviously the season back, the playoffs, and then even the first half of this season. An awful lot of what Sunderland have done well in the last two seasons in terms of bringing through young players, some of the great football they played at times. An awful lot of that was down to Tony Mowbray. There's no denying that. So he'll always be fondly remembered at Sunderland, at Borough, and just wish him and his family all the best.
Absolutely that, and we'll get on to what that could potentially or potentially not mean in terms of head coach searches shortly. But there's only one place to properly start after last night, and that is with the academy. We've already had a couple of comments come in. John, the club need to be careful not to block the route for this homegrown talent by promoting more youngsters from abroad. They look like a great group full of talent. Billy as well, he's contributed. Ogunsui looks the best number 9 at the club at the moment. Stronghold of play and a striker's finish to win the game. Both obviously referring to last night's Premier League 2 semi-final against Reading. Sunderland 4-3 winners on just another remarkable night after what they did against West Ham. 3-3, they came from behind 3 times, won the penalty shootout. Then they go to Reading, take the lead, 2 wonderful goals from Ellis Taylor, then find themselves 3-2 down. Taylor then completes his hat-trick in the 9th minute stoppage time, forced extra time. And then Ogunsui wins it with literally the last kick of the game in the 120th minute. And they'll now play Tottenham in the final this weekend. We've spoke about it quite a lot in the last couple of weeks because they have been the shining light at the club at the moment, along with the women's team as well with their season that they've had, given what's gone with the men's first team. But what a journey, what a season. And again, just what a night that was last night for them.
Yeah, and whatever happens in the final now, surely these lads will take so much from the experience and the kind of journey and the matches that they've been involved in. Massive feather in the cap for the academy, which is, has had a lot of criticism over the last few seasons in terms of where are the players, why aren't they able to hold on to players? Well, and to be fair, you've got to give some credit to the current regime as well, who did make a point of the need to strengthen the foundations of the academy and the desire to actually hold on to some of these players. And thus far, certainly on that aspect of the club, they've been as good as their word. So I think they need some credit. Graham Murty clearly deserves some credit because he's dragged a couple of performances and there's clearly a great spirit within that group. The players themselves need an awful lot of credit. I guess the interesting thing now is, and John's question kind of alluded to this, where are they actually at in terms of their development? Are they ready for first team football next season? Is Tommy Watson ready? Is Ogunsui ready? It's a really interesting one because you look at some of the first team performances this season, especially in the attacking third of the pitch, and the temptation is there to say, well, how on earth can they be any worse than what Sunderland have been trying to fashion something out of? They have to be ready to have a go. I take that argument. I also, though, look at the fact that the last three head coaches, so Mowbray, Beale, Dodds, if you count Dodds as that, have deemed them not to be ready. These are very young lads. They've not had, pretty much all of them have not had loan experience in the Football League. So I think it will be really interesting to see what involvement they have in pre-season in the summer and whether the new head coach deems them to be at a level where they're genuinely ready to compete for first-team places next season. I fully understand the clamour to get them in and give them a go. I just come back to the fact that, they are very young. They are very inexperienced. I am absolutely sure that some of them would benefit from at least half a season in League One or League Two next year just to start playing regular football. That said, I think we're probably getting towards a point where there's an argument that at least one or two of them are not very far off being able to challenge for first-team football at all, and are maybe just one really good pre-season away from being in the first-team group next season, which has to be exciting. But clearly, you're not going to see all 11 of them in the first-team group next year. That's kind of cloud cuckoo land, but that's not diminishing what they've achieved in the last two games.
I mean, particularly the way that they're doing it as well, the sort of resolve, the resilience, that's their two words that Graham Murphy's used quite a lot. To do that at this stage of their careers takes a hell of a lot, doesn't it? And like you say, regardless of what happens in the final, they've got so much to take into next season, and if they get into pre-season as well. But just to go back to your original point on it, in terms of what the ownership have done, if you think back 4 years where this academy didn't even win a game throughout the season, finished bottom with 1 point, I think we got minus 40-odd goal difference. Players were getting sold off. You think of the likes of Barley Mumba or Joe Hugill, even going back to Sam Greenwood, players like that who've just been let go out of the academy. Really good, talented players. And it does feel as though there's a good crop coming through again. You mentioned some of them there. Tom Watson obviously is going to be the one that stands out, but it does feel as though we're getting back to the stage where there's a good crop of talent coming through where that can only be a benefit for the club.
And that's where I think Chris Rigg signing the scholarship deal last summer was very important, because for the first time, it's kind of sent a signal that a player who could potentially be an absolute superstar further down the line is right involved in England youth setups, even above where he probably should be in terms of his age, was willing to commit to Sunderland. Now, we all know there's going to be further questions asked of Rigg this summer. Clearly, we all hope that he signs a first professional deal with Sunderland and stays. I still think there's a really good chance that'll happen, which will be another tick in the box for Sunderland. Even if Rigg was to leave now, though, I think he's reached a point of his career where it wouldn't be the same as losing the kind of youngsters that Sunderland have lost in the past. Whereas had he gone away last summer, it would have felt very much like that. So I think that was a big moment, the fact that Rigg and those around him felt that Sunderland was the right place for him. And that's been shown to be absolutely correct. He's played first-team football. He's gone away and had his tournament. All of that has worked for him at Sunderland. But I just think the fact that last summer, when, it still felt like the damage that had been done by the list of players who had left in the past was still very much at the forefront of everyone's mind. The fact that Rigg and those around him said, no, I'm happy to sign on the line. I want to stay at Sunderland, I think was a big moment for the whole academy project at the club.
Yeah, Chris Rigg's one that I want to talk about, so I might as well go into him now. Obviously, last week you brought the story about Manchester United sort of readying a deal, they sort of offer this summer. Not the first name to be linked to big names across, the Premier League and Europe.
Yeah.
Where do you think it sits at the moment? I know you're saying that you're still confident that you think he might stay, but surely if a club like Man United, I know all of the troubles that they're going through, but if a club like Man United come in, it's going to be hard for Rigg and his family and everything to turn that down, isn't it? Even though he's probably going to be giving up first team opportunities by going to somewhere like Man United in the short term, just the sort of glitz and the glamour of going to a club like Man United again. I mentioned Hugill there earlier on. He's one who did that, but it seems as though it will be difficult for him to turn that down.
it's a wonderful situation to be in for Chris Rigg and those around him, but it's also a very, very difficult one because, you've hit the nail on the head, really, where I think everyone would probably agree that for his footballing development, surely the best thing would be to have another season at Sunderland. He's going to be an absolute nailed-on first team squad or starting lineup regular next season, whoever their head coach is. We've seen more than enough from Chris Rigg in the last month of the season to see that he's absolutely ready to play every week in the Championship. He'll almost certainly get that opportunity with Sunderland next year, all things being equal. What a wonderful opportunity for him to progress his career. You look at someone like Wharton at Palace and the seasons that he had at Blackburn have turned him into the player that he is today, where he's Premier League ready when he's moved to Palace. And, he's probably not going to make it, but he's got an outside chance of getting in the England squad that's going to be named later on this afternoon. So from a footballing point of view, I think it's a no-brainer. The issue is, as you come right down to, if Manchester United table a serious bid and say, look, we think you're the next big thing, we want to get you into our system, we believe in you. Yes, you might not play a lot of football. Yes, you look at what's happened to someone like Ahmad this season and he's barely had a chance until the last month of the campaign. Yes, all of that. But we'll have a plan for you and we'll get you to where you want to be, and we'll also pay you a shed load of money while we're doing that. That's hard, isn't it? That's really hard. I mean, the noises that I'm hearing from kind of within the club, from around Rigg, all of that, seem to suggest that his head's very much screwed on and those around him think that he's in a good place at the moment and value what Sunderland are doing for him. So, I still edge towards the fact that I think he might sign a deal with Sunderland, but it's easy to sit that and say that now until there's actually an offer on the table in front of you. Sign on that line. You're a Man United player for the next 4 years and you, quadruple your wages, probably more. Can anyone turn that down? I don't know. We'll see.
I suppose it's also a could be important factor what happens over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, he's gone away with England's 17 squad over in Cyprus. I think they start tonight against France. Rigg very much be expected to start. He captained the side in March, didn't he, a couple of times?
Yeah.
One of them against France as well. So be interesting to see how he does over there. But again, if he's going and captaining under 17 level, I think he's already made 29 appearances for England across the youth levels. He's 16. Yeah. It is. I almost want to say it's quite frightening, the rise that he's had. If you think back to that debut with under Mowbray at Shrewsbury when he came on, what has happened with him over the course of the last 12 or 18 months? It's staggering, isn't it? He's got so much potential. And for Sunderland to have unearthed a player like that and to have got a player like that goes back to where we started this topic of discussion with the academy moving in the right direction, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely is. And the Sunderland's kind of nurturing of Rigg to this point has been exemplary, really. The issue is, as we say, when does he outgrow them? And the fact that you've talked about that international tournament there is interesting because, yes, my understanding is domestically Man United are currently the ones pushing the hardest, but they're certainly not the only domestic club. But then, we saw the links the other week, didn't we? Dortmund, Leverkusen. I mean, if he's looking at someone like Jude Bellingham and the way that he's developed, well, it doesn't have to be England, does it? So, Europe's biggest clubs will be absolutely all over who Chris Rigg is, what he's capable of doing, where he might be able to get to, and clearly signing Chris Rigg this summer gives you the opportunity to get a superstar before you're signing him in 5 summers' time when he might be £100 million player. So, yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. I mean, whatever happens, Sunderland can only do what they can do. They cannot clearly match any of those clubs for money, for opportunities if Rigg can break into the first team there, for global stature, etc., etc. They can only say to him, look, we've looked after you to this point. We've got your career to here. You're getting your international recognition. You're getting everything. We'll play you in the Championship next year. You'll be our star man. Is that going to be good enough? Well, we'll see. But in fairness to Sunderland, that's all they can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to be a couple of weeks yet anyway, until his birthday and obviously this tournament. But yeah, it's one that they'll be keen to sort of get a solution to quick, won't they, heading into pre-season and any potential new head coach coming in?
Well, it would be such a massive kind of boost for everyone and everything, wouldn't it? If they can parade Rigg in front of the cameras and say, he's signed a professional deal with Sunderland and he believes in what we're doing and all of this. Yeah, it would be a massive thing, and clearly it would be a massive boost to whoever the new head coach is to be able to have him as part of the squad next season. We'll see.
Oh, it looks like we've lost Scott there for a moment. I'll see if we can get back on. I was going to go on to just finish up on the academy stuff, actually, and particularly worth mentioning Ellis Taylor. Are you back with us there, Scott?
Yep.
I was just saying there, we're going to wrap up on the academy stuff with Ellis Taylor. We'd be rude not to mention him after what he did last night. Yes. He's obviously leaving in the summer. The contract situation, the retained list came out last week. Ellis is going to be leaving, but what a response! What a way to conduct yourself. He got his head down, went and scored a hat-trick last night. Just Graham Murphy, he spoke about him and said he's been an excellent pro for Sunderland in this time. You would certainly think what he's done this season, and particularly last night and in the run-in, he's putting himself in the shop window for a move, hopefully to the AFL. Yeah,
well, that's exactly it, isn't it? It would have been a major disappointment to him, I'm sure, when the kind of confirmation came through. I mean, not massively unexpected, probably. I think it's fair to say it's not like it's come from Norway. I think he would have seen the writing on the wall, and there will have been discussions throughout the course of this season. But having said that, it would still have been a disappointment when the final confirmation came through. So, like you say, to respond in the way that he has. Well, it's the best job interview you can have, isn't it? Any club will be looking at his performance last night, and I would have thought that there'll be really strong suitors in Leagues 1 and 2 that would value Ellis Taylor being part of their squad next season, and I'm sure that he will carve out a career for himself in the Football League.
Absolutely, we wish him well, and we'll come back to the academy probably later in the week ahead of the final when we get more details on it. So we've gone over 20 minutes before we get to the head coach stuff. But just before we start, I'll plug our competition that ends this Friday. So you've only got a couple of days left to get involved with this and get your hands on a pair of Black Cats Bar season tickets for next season. It's just £1 to enter. Subscribe to We Are Sunderland, and you can be in with a chance to win what is a fantastic prize worth over £1,600, if I'm not mistaken. Pop the link
I'll just jump in there as well and say that is an absolutely fantastic competition. But even aside from the competition, if you haven't been onto the website recently, then the profiles that Joe and Matty have done of the kind of candidates in the running for the head coach job are absolutely superb. They've formed most of my research and analysis and everything. So I absolutely fully recommend that you give them a read, because in terms of who are these people, what can they offer to Sunderland, what might a Will Still Sunderland side or look like, or a Paul Heckenbottom Sunderland side or whatever. This is really, really interesting reads on there.
I appreciate that. When you can, like I say, you can get access to all of that for just £1. And if you do that, subscribe, and you'll get a chance to enter this competition as well. Like I say, it ends on Friday. So, head coach, we spoke briefly about Tony Mowbray there, so I'll start there. Liam Rosenior has been linked with Birmingham, possibility going in there, one who's become available after his exit from Hull. Sort of some suggestions that Sunderland are interested in him as well. Another name, obviously, that's been just sort of thrown up in the last fortnight, I guess, along with Bo Svensson, and then the candidates who've been there for a while, Heckenbottom, Roll, Still, Marriage. Yeah. They seem to be the six. I know that seems quite a broad search at this stage, at this late in the game, but where we at? Where do you think Sunderland are at?
So the Rosenior one, we'll start there, because Sunderland clearly have spent the second half of the season looking at their options. We know that they were sounding out people before the season ended. We know that there was a shortlist in place before the season ended. Rosenior, obviously, at that stage would not have been under consideration, because all the thoughts were that he would be at Hull next year, and that's that. He's the one who suddenly come onto the kind of stage, and it is there now as an option if Sunderland want him to be. The interesting thing is, how far had the process got down the line before Rosenior left Hull? And to what extent have Sunderland really already made up their mind what they're doing? and so, aren't going to be swayed by Rossignol. I think that, there will have been a degree of interest when Liam Rossignol lost Hull, because any club in the Championship needing a head coach, as Sunderland are, well, a head coach suddenly becomes available who took their side to the brink of the playoffs. Now, we can have in-depth discussions about whether he overperformed or underperformed at Hull or pretty much hit the levels. Regardless of that, he's an experienced Championship manager who's desperate to get back going again in the Championship. Has a pretty good record of working with young players and bringing them through. Tends to play pretty attractive front foot football. Will tick a lot of boxes. That said, I get the feeling that Sunderland have already had their kind of thought process in motion and will probably have been fairly reluctant to turn everything upside down and then suddenly start chasing Rossignol. Let's see. I absolutely don't know that for a fact, because the one thing that the club have done this time is keep everything pretty much under wraps. Yes, there are names out there, but at the moment, there's nobody that I'm aware of, certainly, that is 100% certain about what happens next with Sunderland. There's theories out there, there's thoughts. We know that some people are being spoken to. We know why some people might be waiting, etc., etc. But nobody has the absolute answer at the moment. That said, everything that I'd heard was that prior to the end of the season, Sunderland knew what direction they were wanting to head in and had a pretty good idea of where they wanted to go. Now, clearly, that was happening before all of the Rossignol stuff.
Yeah. Do you think that it would be wise for them to be flexible at this point? They've had 3 months to wait.
I think they need. I think the fact that there's not a head coach in place already, so you've let the process kind of drag on to this point. So it would almost be counterproductive not to then be willing to consider anything that came up and was an option. And Rossignol clearly is that. The interesting thing, as you've said there, is all of a sudden you've got a number of Championship clubs who are almost certainly going to be looking in the same kind of managerial market. And that wasn't necessarily the case at the end of the season. I don't think many people expected Norwich to be looking for a head coach. Yes, the kind of Tony Mowbray situation was there, but it certainly wasn't obvious that Birmingham were going to be looking for a head coach. Hull obviously have had their search. If Leeds lose on Sunday, do Leeds find themselves looking for a new boss?
You could say the same.
You could probably say the same for Southampton. I don't think either of those are out the question. So, I think you are in a scenario where there are a lot of clubs looking for what, if they're looking for the same type of person as Sunderland are, which, let's be honest, seems to be the way that the bulk of Championship clubs are looking now to bring in that kind of young, progressive, ambitious head coach. Well, the same 4 or 5 names that we've been talking about with Sunderland for the last 2 months will inevitably be the same 4 or 5 names that are in the equation there as well. So, that's an interesting one. Have Sunderland been preparing themselves that they might have to have a real battle for their number one choice? Or is that now suddenly a situation that they hadn't really foreseen before the end of the season?
I mean, that number one choice, at least according to the bookmakers, remains Will Still. He's still odds on. Obviously, their season finished on Sunday, I believe. I know he's obviously not been there for a couple of weeks now since he left. Could be some sort of contractual issues around that.
Yeah, there's been suggestions of that in France, haven't there?
With that being the case, if Still is the man, would you expect movement on that soon?
Yeah, I think if it is going to be Still, then, as I say, there have been suggestions in France in the last week or so that part of the terms of him leaving Reims towards the end of the season was that, effectively garden and leave to the end of the season, however they wanted to term it. So as you say, that's over now. So why has there been such a delay? Well, if it is going to be Will Still, and if Sunderland, formally have not been able to actually speak to him until that severance package with Rem is agreed and finalised and everything. And like I say, that is a suggestion that's been put out there in the French media in the last week or so. Then then that would at least explain why we've got to this point with seemingly nothing really having happened or changed. And you would think that if that was the case, then the next week or so would be what enable Sunderland to get things sorted or wrap things up, or at the very least have the formal on-the-record conversations that maybe they haven't been able to have up until now.
I guess it's just frustrating from that point of view. I mean, if you think, I'm going off a little bit of a tangent here, but if you think, look at what Liverpool have done with Arne Slot. He's already confirmed the day after the Premier League season's finished. They've obviously had them discussions. They've known that he's their target. Could Sunderland not have done that, or is it more complicated than that, do you think, if it is still?
Well, I think if it is still, there's a couple of things. I think, one, it could be more complicated than that if Reims have, for whatever reason, felt the need to put pretty, strict parameters in place of what he is and isn't allowed to do before their season officially ends. I mean, the other thing is, if you're Will Still, as for all the reasons we've alluded to, you're probably quite happy to spin this out and keep your plate spinning and keep options open because, I would be very surprised if Sunderland weren't the only club that were wanting to speak to Will Still at the minute. So if you're Still, why wouldn't you speak to everyone? And, if nothing else, it gives you the opportunity to play one off against the other and potentially get more money, a longer-term deal, more clout over certain things that you want to change, more opportunities to bring in your backroom staff, which, potentially is a sticking block at Sunderland. I fully understand from his point of view why you'd want to keep the options open, whereas Slot at Liverpool is slightly different because this is his once-in-a-lifetime move. He wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardise that. The minute Liverpool came calling, he couldn't get there quickly enough. Well, we'd all like that to be the case with Will Still at Sunderland, but the reality is that's not the case, is it? Will Still's in demand and, would be pretty foolish not to kind of listen to everyone who's out there and weigh up his options.
Yeah, and you mentioned the backroom staff there. That was one thing I was going to come on to. It's been mentioned before in terms of when Michael Beale came in. He came in by himself. Was he or wasn't he allowed to bring staff in? Suggestions were that he might have been sort of once he'd got his feet under the table. We spoke to Mike Dodds towards the end of the season. His understanding was that we'll be allowed to bring staff in. I think Christian Speakman mentioned it in the supporters, like in a fan group meeting, that a member of staff will be able to come in if it's the right person. Will Still, I think his brother's been assistant there at Rons. Nicholas, that is something that you would imagine is a key factor in him being able to move, but also possibly bringing more staff in for him as well. Just given how he's sort of come up, he came up through the sort of being a video analyst and then worked his way through as a coach and then an assistant and then a head coach himself. He's going to have staff that are there that he will want to bring, perhaps rather than just one.
Yeah, you would have thought so. You definitely would have thought so. And I think that is an interesting dynamic and an important dynamic with Sunderland's search that, there seems to be a pretty strong message that there are people within the setup who have to remain within the setup. And, Speakman and Kirill Louis-Dreyfus are either grooming to be future managers or trust them to the extent that they want them to be part of this. Now, some managers will happily agree to that. Other managers, that will be far more of an issue. I think that there was an awful lot went wrong with the Michael Beale era, and I'm not saying this was the one thing, and I'm not saying that Beale was ever going to be the right man for Sunderland, but I don't think it helped him that he had his own man, a trusted right-hand man who he could turn to when things were going wrong and who could lead him down a certain path and who could just be a support to him. Because when it was all unraveling, you just imagined him going back to his hotel room kind of on a night and just being consumed by it all. So, I personally think that any head coach should be allowed to bring in someone who they trust and feel is a sounding board and can work with. Now, the suggestion certainly be that is going to happen this time, that whoever it is will be allowed to bring someone with them. But most head coaches, managers, whatever you want to call them now, come with a team and will generally have more than one person who they want in that building in pretty senior positions. And that's something that Sunderland are going to have to be kind of mindful of if they're going to stick to this model project, whatever you want to call it. That yes, it's all very well having your own backroom staff and setup and structures that you want to continue, whoever the head coach is. But I think you have to be adaptable and you have to accept that the head coach is going to want their own leeway to change certain things.
Yeah, I think you're right to mention that about Bale as well. It just felt as though there was no escapism at all, was there?
Yeah.
But on him as well, how much, just sort of start to close this up, but how much do you think naturally what's happened with him and the way that went is impacting how they're going about this process and making sure that they do absolutely everything they can to not suffer the same sort of...
Yeah. Well, you'd like to think it was. It's having that kind of an impact because, you know, there aren't many managerial appointments that go as disastrously wrong at any club as Sunderland's decision to turn to Michael Beale. You know, let's not beat around the bush there. It was just a disastrous appointment that ultimately sabotaged the season. So, you know, they cannot afford to make another mistake like that, whether it be his readiness for managing a club like Sunderland, whether it be the way he wants his team to play, whether it be his relationship with the players, the press, the fans, everything, the whole package. Clearly, this appointment needs to be infinitely better than the decision to turn to Beale. So, you know, you would like to think that lessons have been learned from that and that they've adapted their processes and procedures and the data that they're looking at and the due diligence that they're doing. You'd like to think that they've kind of changed all of that. The slight worry is that up until now, while there has been a degree of, yes, we got it wrong, it almost feels like the overriding message from those above was, well, yeah, we kind of got it wrong, but it's a bit of a blip. It's not going to affect the way we do things. We're still right. That the overriding project remains. It's a little blip in the road, but ultimately we're doing everything right. Well, I think there needs to be a bit deeper examination of what went wrong with that. And you know, that's why, for all that we're all kind of impatient and want someone through the door, if they're taking this time because they've learned those lessons and they're now getting the process right, well, fair enough.
And to put you on the spot then, when we reconvene on Friday for another briefing, do you think we'll be any closer? How long do you think this has got left to run? I mean, there's cup finals and things to completely finish the season over the next week, 10 days, which would take us into the beginning of June. Do you think that will be the time frame?
I think that by the start of next week, if there's not a manager in place, we'll have a much better idea of who it's going to be. I think that this week will surely have to be the week when Sunderland are either holding their final talks or starting to talk contracts and stuff. And by that stage, news will surely start to leak out then of who it is and you know, who they're bringing with them and all that kind of stuff. Famous last words, but I think that by the start of next week, I'm not saying the manager will be in place because that, you know, takes a few days to get the kind of final I's dotted and T's crossed and the wheels in motion and all that kind of stuff. But I think by the end of the weekend, we'll have to have surely a much better idea of who it's going to be.
We shall soon see. Thank you very much for joining us, Scott. Appreciate that this morning. Another shout out to the Fans Museum and Prospects Opticians in Durham for sponsoring us, as always, here at We Are Sunderland. Make sure that you subscribe for just £1. Like I say, a couple of days left to enter that Black Cats Bar competition. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We like engaging with you as well on these videos. So make sure you do that for free. Stay up to date with our briefings and interviews on there as well. We'll be back later in the week for another briefing. Thanks for joining us.